Here we are, another edition of Late Night with Mark and Rob. Coming to you live from Sunday. It's been a while. We're going to talk a little college, a little NFL, all football. Hot thing on everyone's mind is these upsets that went down. And I don't think there's anyone who can say they saw it happening because it was so outrageous. I don't think there's ever been a weekend when 5 of the top 10 teams lost. Obviously, you had Oregon lose on Thursday, and then you lost Alabama, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, UCLA. So now the whole college playoff thing is just it's been blown wide open. So we're going to talk who we think those top 4 teams are going to be, just because it was kind of like it was trending in a direction, and then all those teams lost. So it's now totally up in the air. I'll let Mark run through his top 4 first.
Well, just touching on the upsets, it's one of those things where you look at that lineup of, I think, 5 games you brought up, and every one, you try to look at the matchup individually, and, you can maybe try to pick an upset here and there, but to have 5 across the board happen in one Saturday is or I guess a Thursday and a Saturday it's pretty wild. In terms of top 4, as you said, this definitely shakes things up a lot. I'm thinking, obviously, I'm going to toss Florida State in there. I think that's a pretty safe bet at this point to, obviously, as you said earlier, run the table and end up in that 4-team playoff. I'm going to go with Auburn as well, just because I think at this point I trust the SEC. I'm not a huge college football guy, but I've seen them play a fair amount, and I think you know what you're getting there, and they've impressed me so far this year. I think Baylor is maybe a team to look at in the Big 12. They're going to score points. They're pretty consistent on that front. And, when you're putting up 45 a game, a lot else can go wrong. You can still walk away with the win. So I think that's a pretty good pick. On the fence with my 4th team, I'm going to hear your picks before I make that final commitment, see where we line up.
Okay. As far as the top 4 go, the thing for me that drives this entire system is you wish it wasn't the case, but you got to look at the ratings a little bit. So when there's a team on the fence, and it's like, let's say it's a fence team, it's like maybe it's Alabama, maybe it's Mississippi State. It's like Alabama's going to get in. I'm not saying that's one of my picks, so I'm just saying that's what you have to look at as a borderline team. Obviously, I think Florida State will run the table in the ACC. The really only game they could lose is to Notre Dame, and right now I guess Notre Dame's kind of looking like they could be, it's looking like from everything I'm hearing they're going to be 3rd in the country after the new rankings come out. Yeah. But I think I do think they'll get rolled by Florida State and Tallahassee in 2 weeks if they don't lose to the Tar Heels next week. I don't think Notre Dame's a team that is really capable of national championships. We saw it when they went undefeated with a weak schedule, played Alabama, got rolled 2 years ago. So I'm not Notre Dame's out for me. I'm thinking Florida State is going to be a lock. I think they'll go undefeated in the ACC. I think Auburn is also a pick of mine, and then my other 2 is actually I think Oregon is going to end up running the table in the Pac-12. I think they'll win the Pac-12, have 1 loss. Everyone else will have 1 loss. I think it'll be hard to not put Oregon in the game, so I think Oregon will go. And then I think it'll be one other SEC team with Auburn, and I think it could be, it's just a toss-up. It could be Ole Miss. I think if they keep up what they've been doing, I think it might end up being Florida State, Auburn, Ole Miss, and Oregon. And I think Alabama's going to lose again. I just don't think Alabama's that good of a team. I had Ole Miss plus 5.5 at home. I thought that was easy money. I've been against Alabama against the spread a couple times this year. Was against them against West Virginia, and they didn't show up. I just don't think Alabama. I think people are caught up in Alabama and Nick Saban as if they are what they were 2 years ago, and they're not. The SEC is very good. That's the thing we're going to touch on next. Because I've heard a lot of calls. It's like, is the SEC really that good? And does these teams highly ranked teams beating each other, does that mean the SEC is very good, or does it mean they're overrated and kind of anyone can beat anyone? Because the exact same thing's happening out in the Pac-12, where it's like some people think they're a strong conference and they're beating each other too. So is it parity in college football, or is the SEC definitely better than everyone else? And I'll get Mark's take on that before I dive into it.
Well, I'm always hesitant to look at parity and draw negative conclusions from it. I think it generally, when you're looking at college football, where it's pretty heavily weighted towards what conference you're in, what teams you're playing on a yearly basis, and when you have teams that are consistently beating each other on what I would call an unpredictable pattern, it's, I guess, any given Saturday you could say. I wouldn't really cite that as evidence against the SEC, or the Pac-12, as you said, and that's just sort of my gut take on it. It's college football. I think we all know that things are going to take interesting turns on a weekly basis, and I think that speaks to the consistent caliber of the conference as opposed to any sort of, overinflation of their reputation on the college football scene. Again, on both accounts, the SEC and the Pac-12. I mean, Mississippi State this year is obviously tearing it up, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm not a hardline college football fan, but I definitely try to keep up with it. And I mean, this team, they're really playing, I don't want to say lights out, but they're impressing this season, and I can't say I know too much about Mississippi State football, so, I don't know if it's the right move to herald that as like evidence of the SEC being the best conference in college football and as good as everyone says it is, but I guess that's my natural inclination. I don't know how you feel about it.
My whole thing, and I know Pac-12 fans love to call in and be like, there's a double standard in college football, because the double standard is the SEC beats each other up and everyone beats everyone, and it's like, oh, that's because they're so good. And then out in the Pac-12, it's like everyone beats everyone, and it's like, oh, it's because it's a weak conference. So I understand where they're coming from, but what they need to understand is there's a reason the SEC has won, 80% of the last 10 national championships. Like Florida dominated it, Alabama dominated it. Sure, Florida State got it last year, but in general, the SEC has dominated. So there's no reason to believe that when these teams beat each other in good games and they're highly ranked teams, that they don't deserve to be ranked high. I think they do, because their conference has shown in the past decade that it's the best conference in football. So for me, it's the Pac-12 kind of, they might be good, but they have to get something done on the national scale before I'm going to buy them. If they're just beating each other up and everyone's like, they might be good, I'm not going to buy that until they go into a national championship game and win, go into big bowl games and win, which they haven't done yet. So until they do that, I'm not going to say they're being underrated and the SEC's overrated.
I think you're absolutely right, because as you pointed, really we can sum it up with really pretty much your first point is that the numbers and the championships over the last decade plus has shown us that SEC dominates college football, and the Pac-12 just sort of hoisting the fact that they also beat each other up a lot, as you said. It doesn't put them on the same level as the SEC in any regard, and I don't think anyone should think that. It's just one of those things where you need to be realistic and look at which teams are winning and where those teams are coming out of, and it paints a pretty clear picture.
Yeah, I mean, the crown jewel of the Pac-12 football has been Oregon and I guess Stanford. Oregon played a damn good championship game against Auburn. Maybe, there was the rollover play where Dwyer, I think it was, ran it to the house, and there was the PI call. And Oregon played a very good game, and they hung with Auburn and were as good as Auburn that year, I think. But that was with Chip Kelly. It was a different team, and that was one team. And then the other team you look at is Stanford, and this year they've already lost 2 games. So at some point, if you're not going to get it done at the highest level, you're not going to be taken seriously until you do that. So if Oregon runs the table, and if they do run the table, win the Pac-12, I think they will get probably the 4th spot in the playoff. And if they get that spot and get to the championship game, maybe, I'm not saying they'll win it, but if they do win it, that'll bring relevance to the Pac-12. But you have to, Pac-12 fans, you got to be honest with yourself. You're not going to get relevance until someone makes you relevant, and no one has yet. Going to a national championship against Auburn was big, but you lost, and it was, it was close, but you lost. So you need someone to make you relevant more than one team that went undefeated in a weak conference and lost to Auburn.
Yeah, and speaking of Oregon, I think Oregon-UCLA next week is a really interesting game. They're both coming off losses, and you'd like to think that that would end up leaving Oregon in the dominant position, considering that, I think all things aside, they're definitely the better football team by a pretty wide margin. But it's at UCLA. You're at home, crowd gets loud, anything can happen, and how interesting would that be if Oregon just drops a 2-game losing streak in the middle of the season? As they hit their tough stretch, fair enough, but still, I don't think anyone saw that coming. I think we're moving on to NFL today. Talking about these games, I think the first one I was going to touch on, just based on how I watched them, was Panthers-Bears. And this was a weird game, because just based on how that first half went, I found myself thinking the Bears looked good right up until they lost. It took a really quick turn. The offense just shut down, which is never what you want to see out of a team that has Jeffrey and Marshall on the perimeter. But Cutler turned it over a few times, and I guess the Panthers came roaring back. That defense turned it on at some point.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're going to talk about who we had. In the future, we'll do this on Wednesdays, so you can kind of.
I was on the Bears, by the way.
Mark was on the Bears, and we'll get on this earlier in the week, so you can kind of listen into our thought process, see who we're on. The thing for me today was I was actually driving, so I couldn't watch the game, and I was on the Panthers actually, -3. Mark got the Bears at +1.5, so that line was moving. Though that was kind of the trend in the week. The lines were jumping around. The Eagles Rams line was at 7, moved all the way down to 4. The Saints Bucks line was jumping all over the place. The Texans Cowboys line was jumping all over the place. Yeah, I was on the Panthers in that one, and I basically am just checking it as I drive on my GameCast, and they get down fast. Like, the Bears went up about 20. The Panthers had a punt return touchdown to start the game, and then after that, it was like the Bears rolled them for the entire half, went up 21-7, and then they just kept clawing back. The same thing happened. I was also on the Giants, which was my lock of the week. I wish we had made this show earlier so I could have told you that. Falcons are abysmal on the road. They got out to a lead, and slowly Giants just overtook them and ended up winning comfortably in that one. Other notable games, I had the Texans +4, lost by 3. I had Jacksonville +7, they lost by 8, so I lost on that one. Had Indy -3, I thought that was a good play at home. Well, that was an interesting game too because of how low scoring it was. Had Denver, I knew they'd roll the Cardinals. I don't really buy the Cardinals yet. I guess Stanton got hurt and they had to bring in their third-string quarterback, which was kind of a death wish for them. I had San Fran +4.5, or I had San Fran -4.5, won by 5. But I also had the Jets and they lost 31-0. So I won more than I lost, but I had some bad losses. Mark, who do you have?
Well, this is actually a funny spot because about 8 hours ago, Rob here was telling me how the Jets were going to win this game, and it's the game the New York Jets are going to win of the entire season. But that didn't happen. I was big on the Chargers in that one. I'll say that. I was also on the Niners, had it at 4.5 as well, and I liked what I saw out of them. They worked themselves out of a tough spot against, I'm a Pats guy, so what I would say at this point is a good Chiefs team. I got to believe that if I think we have any chance of doing anything late in the season. So, accordingly, I was on the Pats, took that home. Love to see that other team. We can touch on that later. And then I made a stupid-ass second-half bet on Dallas, thinking they're going to take care of the Texans, but obviously that didn't happen. So
second-half bets are dangerous.
They're dangerous. They're never smart. Stay away from them if you know what's good for you. Moving on to Monday night, I guess, in terms of who we like. It's an interesting matchup because I think we both know Seahawks on the road is nothing to write home about. But the line's sitting at 7 right now, and it's at -115. But on the road with a team that has proven itself to really not show well away from the home field, I just look at that line and think, what's going on here? That's something that I think will probably move around a fair bit tomorrow as people see that and react to it. But it's pretty baffling where it's at right now.
No, I'm with you on it being surprising just because it's home team getting more than I'm seeing 7.5, so it's a home team getting more than a touchdown as underdogs on a primetime game. honestly, for me, it's so surprising that it almost makes me think the Seahawks are the play.